Are you living life that actually promotes the gospel or hinders the gospel? Are you promoting love or hatred or anger? Are you a person of mercy and grace? Because for a lot of people, especially nowadays, we live in a post-Christian world. You are the only Bible they will read. And if you're the only Bible they read, when they see your life, do they see the gospel in your life? Or do they see anger, frustration, or bitterness? You know, when I was looking at this passage and was considering it, it made me think of one of the greatest Christians that has been around, which was William Wilberforce, who was encouraged by, who wasn't sure if he wanted to stay in politics, but this one man named John Newton came alongside and says, no, I think God has prepared you for this assignment. Stay in Parliament. Fight God's fight there. To some degree, that's what Steve has been doing for years in Maine. He's been representing Christianity in Maine to fight the good fight here. Well, William Wilberforce, if you know the story, if you ever seen the movie Amazing Grace, one of the most amazing movies. In fact, after doing the sermon, I'm going to have to rewatch it because it's such a wonderful movie. William Wilberforce spent 20 years of his public service life fighting to end slavery in England. And after ailment and fighting, the discouragement, it finally happened. In fact, later on, not only he's often known for this, but he also fought for prison reform, for better working conditions and work conditions, education for the poor, missionary work, more reform. He fought for and even for animal reform. And so he is a man who lived out his Christian life in the public service. And so, to some degree, that comes to the heart, our message, as we look at Titus 3, 1 through 2. In Titus 3, 1 to 2, you see it's about being a godly witness in the world, in our civic society. How do we live out this godly life? And so real quick, we'll do a short message on building a healthy church, and we're looking at being a godly citizen. Now, if there's anything that we need now more than ever, especially with all the conflict and riots and everything going on, we need to understand what does it mean to be a good, godly citizen in our world. So let's look at the first verse. Oh, we want to look at two things, respecting authority and loving your neighbor. But let's look at the first one, respecting authority. Verse 1, it says again, let's read it again. And remind them to be subject to rulers, to authorities, and to be obedient. Now, one of the things as you consider this one is it's one thing that doesn't mean that every ruler and every authority and every government is going to be perfect. It doesn't mean that when we subject ourselves to rules and authority that they're going to be godly leaders. In fact, if we look throughout the Bible, how many of the rulers were pagans? Even Paul, as he writes to Titus, he's writing under the Roman leadership, a pagan leadership. And so what Paul is telling us is despite the leadership, good, bad, Democrat, Republican, Independent, Libertarian, whoever it is, as Christians, to be good citizens, to be good servants of the Lord, we must submit ourselves to them. And a lot of times we're like, well, that doesn't feel right. That shouldn't be true. But Paul will remind us in Romans 13:1, not only are we to submit ourselves to authority, but to understand the authority we submit to has been appointed to God. And that's one thing that changes from how we look at government. We don't look at government as just people we vote on, but as people that God has ordained to be put in authority to promote what is good and restrain evil. That's their purpose. And if they do their jobs well, then of course we will submit to them. Now, The reason why government is necessary, because sometimes if you talk to some people, if I could just get, but government is essential because government encourages orderly society. It restrains evil. That's what police force and even military force are, is to restrain evil. It's to protect people. We're talking about police officer or the fire department or ambulance, or that these things are to promote good and preserve peace. That's the job of government, to preserve peace, to create order in society so it doesn't fall into confusion, disorder, and injustice. And if government does their job, then we understand why we are to submit to them. Because to do so, we are promoting good. If we're rebellious of governing authority, then we're not promoting good, we're promoting evil. And so that's why it's so important. Now, this is why the story of the prophet Daniel is so important, because Daniel was in Babylon, in Persia, and he was not under he was under a pagan rule. But even though he's under pagan rule, he submitted and faithfully served whoever was a king or ruler. There's only one objection, is when the king asked him to worship false idols, and he said no. Or whenever he was asked to break some rule that is to stop praying, he said no. And that, Daniel gives us a principle of how we should view government even today. That as long as they don't ask to do us anything ungodly or sinful, we are to submit to them. It is only under those exceptions, if they ask us to sin, ungodly or idolatry, that now you're free to disregard. But do it in the most respectful way. So, this being said, we need to be godly citizens. Godly citizens are not lawless. They pay their taxes, even though some of us don't want to. They pay their taxes, obey the laws, and respect public servants. That when a police car pulls you over, which I had happen this week, my registration was out of date. But when he pulled me over, I said, "Yes, officer, how can I help you?" "No, I'm not aware what I did wrong." He said, "You know you're at," "Oh my goodness, I can't believe. I'm just getting my car to get worked on. As soon as I get my car worked on, I will take it down to town office where I get the stickers." But I did it in a very respectful way. I gave him the respect he's due because that's what he's been put there for. And so that's really the question, and ultimately, is when you get pulled over by a cop, or when you political party, where it's the Democrat wins or Republican wins, I don't care what political party it is, you are to show them the due respect of their office. Because in those offices, they are God's servant. We may not agree with them. Sometimes you really don't agree with them. But we are still to show them the respect and honor they are due. And that is a testimony of the gospel. Because what we're seeing as we do this, and one of the reasons why we think, well, why is that? Is because we're saying that our citizenship is not of this world, but it's heaven. And we have to represent Christ. In a way, all of us, as we are citizens of this nation, is ambassadors for Christ. And if we're going to be ambassadors for Christ, what example of what it means to be a godly citizen are we living out? And that communicates the gospel. And it communicates what it means to be living not just under the United States rule, but under Christ's rule. And so, there's the first thing. The second thing we're looking at, or let me ask you this. What does your response to governing authority say about the gospel? What does your response to governing authority say about the gospel? Because we always should understand that our testimony is saying what it means to be a Christian. It's saying what does it mean to be under God's authority. It says what does it mean to be a gospel. So how you respond to governing authority, how does it reflect the gospel? That's something for you to think about. Loving your neighbors is the next major thing. As citizens of this country, we are to love our neighbors and sister. And as Jesus explained in the Good Samaritan, and it says, well, who is my neighbor? And he used the example of a Samaritan. And we need to understand the Samaritan were considered the most evil, horrendous thing. And the evil guy is the hero of the story. And it's saying that you are to love your enemy. Jesus said, love your enemies. To love your enemies, to pray for your enemies. And so who's your neighbor? Anyone. Even those you would consider outright wrong, evil. God has called you to love them. I'll get why in a second when we get to the gospel. But it says this in verse 2, to be ready for every good work, to slander no one, to be peaceful, considerate, demonstrate all gentleness to all men. Now, we can see we're transitioning from civil governing authority to our loving neighbor. But to some degree, it means, what does it mean to be in a community? What does it mean to live in the United States? What does it mean to be a Christian? And we are citizens of two kingdoms, the kingdom of God and the kingdom of man. And how do we live in that relationship? And now we're looking at your neighbors. As we look at our neighbors to the left of us or to the right of us, and even the one across the street from us who has a gay pride flag, how am I to treat them? So let's look at the 5 things. Ready for every good thing, every good work. You know, one of the things important is saying it's being a good citizen is not just avoiding sin, it is to desire to promote good in the world. A desire to say there's something, if someone's hurting or in need or suffering, that we're quick to step in to help those in need. The poor, the widow, the orphan, that we come alongside people to promote the general welfare of our community, to be encouragement to the weak and those who need help, to our friends, family, and neighbors, and even the neighbors across the street. And so why don't I ask you this real quick for this one is to say, how can you be a blessing for others? One thing you always be in the war out, look, how can you be a blessing? When you see someone in need, ask yourself, can I meet that person's needs? How can I be a blessing to that person? And then one thing the gospel does, it transforms us because the gospel says not to be me-centric, but to be God-centric and other-centric. That me is the last thing I ask. And so what God's asking us is, how can I do good to others? The second one is slander no one. And in fact, again, this is one that we talked about during Mother's Day, but here it comes up again. Slander no one, which means we don't tear people down, which means we don't damage people's reputations, that we don't spread lies, that we don't engage in slander, gossip, insults, or rumors. Instead, and even if it's your neighbor and you don't agree with their politics, maybe you really don't agree with their politics, that you don't get angry and frustrated or slander people. You don't slander politicians, neighbors, co-workers, or anyone. You are to instead, and here's the thing, this is what Paul would tell us, encourage them. Be a person who's a truth teller. Be a person who promotes love, mercy, grace, peace, love. That our words, when we speak, it should be a blessing. In fact, when someone interacts with you, they should feel more blessed and more encouraged because I just spent time. You know, one of the things, and I'll say this, I say this often to Steve Pratt. He's such an encourager. I love his puns. I love his jokes. And everyone who he interacts with is more blessed because he's talked to them and interacted with them than before. And that's what we are to be. We are to be someone who encourages and makes people's life better with our tongues. Our words can either break people down or encourage people. And that's what Jesus did. Jesus often spoke words of love, mercy, grace, and truth, and they were drawn to him because honey is more attractive than bitterness. Third, peaceable. Oh, now that's something we need, right? We need peace. You know, Christians should not be known as the ones who fight, the ones who are quick to get in arguments, they're quick to take offense. You know, Christians be known as the ones who promote peace, the ones who brings stability to an environment, who promote unity, who encourage love, patience, and encourage each other. And that they're not quick to get in battles. They're not that quick to get in fights. But instead are quick to understand, quick to love, and quick to promote peace. That relates to the next one, which is be considerate. And that's one thing that's hard, because when we think about considerate, you think, well, what about me? Again, that's often, as we look at all of these, what Paul is saying is don't be so self-centered. I mean, if there's one thing about the news, one thing about social media, it's all about me, 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 me. But Paul, as we're looking through this list, is considering, say, consider others. Be considerate, be understanding. Be understanding their pain and hurt and history and strife. Don't be rude or mean or belittling. Don't make wide assumptions about them. Instead, be considerate. Love them like Christ loves you. Or let me put it this way. Be as considerate to them as you would want them to be considerate to you. Or as Jesus would say, love others as you would like to be loved. And that changed our thought. Love them the way I would want to be loved. Well, how would I want to be loved? Do I want someone to be rude or mean or inconsiderate? No, I want them to be loving. I want them to be kind. I want them to be understanding. And we're changing that understanding. And lastly, it says, demonstrate all gentleness to all men. And if we were to summarize this whole section, it's really this. And gentleness, this word gentleness, is not weakness. And that's the problem. A lot of people think it's weakness. But it's strength under control. Gentleness is strength under control. That means you could do something, you have the power to do something, and you choose not. You could say something harsh, but instead you say something loving and peaceful. You could get in a fight, but instead you choose to walk away. Gentleness is saying, I do not have to force my beliefs or values on you. Instead, I choose to be loving, kind, gentle, not rude, patient, especially those who are more grace required, and there are some who are more grace required. But even with those, he says, be gentle and kind to all men. And that's the real interesting thing. He's saying all men. So not just, it's easy to be gentle to people we like, the people we love, the people we care about, but to all men. So be kind and gentle to the undeserving. Be gentle to the rude. Be gentle to the lost. Be gentle to those who test your patience. Be gentle to those who are on the opposite political spectrum. Be gentle to them. That is a radical understanding of what it means to be gentle. I want to give you an illustration that I read recently. There's a neighbor. Go back. There's a neighbor. He says, I love my neighborhood. You know, she's kind of like, I love them. But I hate those kids. They're always causing problems. And that dog, he's always barking at night. Oh, and I can't stand my neighbor's politics. Oh, I just, you guys just don't understand. And No, I don't have time for you guys. And then one day, after all that grumping that his neighbors see, he asks his neighbor, hey, would you like to come to church? And the grumpy neighbor, and his neighbor, who's listened to this neighbor grump his whole life, he said, I do not need to go to your church. Every day I saw what you believe in action. Why would I want to go to a church that is grumbly and complaining like you? Oh. That changed it. What does your testimony say? Are your neighbors more blessed? If you're their neighbor and you lived out the gospel in front of them, are you living life that actually promotes the gospel or hinders the gospel? Are you promoting love or hatred or anger? Are you a person of mercy and grace? Because for a lot of people, especially nowadays, we live in a post-Christian world. You are the only Bible they will read. And if you're the only Bible they read, when they see your life, do they see the gospel in your life? Or do they see anger, frustration, or bitterness? That is a question, and it's a very convicting. It should be convicting to all of us. I know I find it convicting. And so this goes back to, why do we need the gospel? Because one of the things, we all fall short of this. We all do not respect government like we should. We all do not love our neighbors like we should, because we're to love our neighbors like Christ loved the church. We all fail. We all stumble. We all are sinners in need of a Savior. And that's why we need the gospel. That's why we need Jesus, who lived that perfect life, because Jesus did honor and respect authority. And he respected the ultimate authority, as God the Father. Jesus did do that. Jesus did love his neighbors as himself. He showed mercy and grace and gentleness and kindness and consideration. He did do that. And on the cross, again, Jesus nailed our sin of disrespect for government, the sin of not loving our neighbor. It was nailed on the cross. So we could be forgiven, and then that we could be transformed, so we can honor government like we should, so we can love our neighbors like we could, and that the gospel transforms us from the inside out, not by external means, not by rules, not through compulsion, but through the gospel transforms you, where God teaches you how to love your neighbor, teaches you how to respect government, and teaches you how to be more like Christ. That's what the gospel does to us. And this goes back to our story about William Wilberforce, because it goes back. William Wilberforce was tutored by John Newton. And if you guys know the story about John Newton, he was a slave trader ship. He sold slaves to America and sailed over the country. And he was in a storm once, and his radical life, he thought he was going to die, and he gave his life for Christ. And when John Newton gave his life to Christ, it radically transforms his world. And that he then would write, Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. And he lived his life was complete. His response to government, his response to his neighbors were radically transformed. In fact, his thought that he was ever a slave trader haunted him. And he mourned the sin. And then he finds this young man, William Wilberforce, and trains him up. And that led to a transforming young man who would end the slave trade. And that's the power of the gospel to change how we live in society today. It is a transformation. And that's what we need, be transformed like John Newton, William Wilberforce, and so many others. I'll tell you this. The world does not need more judgmental Christians. There's already too many. The world needs Christians who will live out the gospel of love, mercy, grace, and truth. They need to see you model Christ. And if they do, that could lead to transformation. So I'm going to leave you off with one of these questions again. I'll leave on that one. What does your response to government say about the gospel? And what does love your neighbor say about the gospel? And what does your witness say about the gospel? Your friends, family, and neighbors are watching how you live your life in our society. Does it communicate the gospel? We'll leave you off with a final saying. May we be a godly witness in this world, respecting authority and loving our neighbors. Let's close in prayer. If you like this video, please like, share, subscribe, and ring that bell. God bless you, and have a good day.
How firm a foundation, ye saints of the Lord, is laid for your faith in this excellent word. What more can he say than to you he has said, to you who for refuge to Jesus has fled?